So a very, very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Michael Kern. I'm the course director at the Craniosacral Therapy Educational Trust. I just want to check, can you hear me okay? Is the volume okay? Everything, just put a thumbs up if everything sounds okay to you. All right, that's reassuring. Thank you, thank you. And yeah, just it's really a delight to have these meetings, and just these are like little tasters for some of the principles that we work with in biodynamic craniosacral therapy. So I'm going to give a bit of a talk at the beginning. We'll do maybe a couple of short exercises just a little bit later in the meeting, and then I'll open up to questions right at the end. At that point, you can either write questions in the chat box, or we may be able to unmute you and have some direct communication as well, if that's something that you would like. And then also at the end, I'll talk a little bit about training and what's next if you are interested in taking any next steps in joining this profession. So I won't say too much about myself, because I think you may have read the blurb, but I've been involved with this practice for, I think, 38 years now, something like that. And it's just an honor, it's a privilege, really, to be involved, to be practicing, and to be teaching. You're going to hear quite a bit from me over the evening, so I don't want to kind of be very long-winded about this. But I do have a couple of colleagues here who are just joining us, who are part of our teaching faculty. And if any of you are interested in joining us on our training, then you will also get to know them and meet them. So maybe I can just ask Nikolai and Paula just to drop in and say a few sentences about yourselves, so perhaps people can also put the face to the name.
I can start. Hi everyone, I'm Nikolai. I'm speaking to you from Copenhagen, where I live. And together with Michael, I'm a senior tutor on the upcoming training. And yeah, I've been involved with this for a long time, not quite as long as Michael, but love the practice. And one of the things that I have a special interest in is also like the psychological holding patterns that we have in our bodies. So that's one of my areas of interest, and especially the early ones from in the womb, birth, and pre-verbal. So that is also some of the things that we will cover along with a lot of other things on the training. Nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Nikolai. Thank you for saying hello.
Hi everyone, I'm Paula, and I live in Surrey, and I am also one of the assistant tutors on the course currently. My background's in physiotherapy. I had 15 years in that field, and then I branched into yoga and mindfulness training. And so, yeah, I feel like I've got a sort of a background in sort of anatomy and physiology, but this work has really been where I feel my calling has come from, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be involved in the tutor team. And I'm also a more recent graduate, so a lot of the recent sort of training is on my mind. I sort of know what it's like to have been that sort of nervous, sort of bit unsure student in the beginning, and sort of watched as this amazing tutor team sort of held our hands as we went through this process. So if you have any questions, please do ask. I feel like I can really support you through that. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so I've got a few pictures. I'm going to start to share my screen. Okay, so then I think yeah, let's just try. How's that? Everyone can can see okay. Beautiful. Okay, so there we are. Gosh, it says June 2025. That's a little premature, isn't it? We're still in May. That's a mistake. Anyway, but I am Michael Kern, and this is the Fluid Body. So warm welcome. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about just some of the key principles of the work, and then I'll go into something a little bit more specific around the fluid body. And I'm just going to say, I'm not going to make any assumptions of prior knowledge. So this is just going to be laying out a few foundations. But the practice really developed from an American osteopath who around the turn of the last century, so in the early 1900s, was a final year student of osteopathy. And he was examining a set of disarticulated cranial bones, like the ones that you can see here in this painting. And in particular, he was looking at some of the specialized articulations in some of these joints in the cranium. And in particular, he was looking at sutures like this. This is the temporal bone, which is at the side of the head, and it houses the ear canal and the joint for the mandible, the temporomandibular joint, as well as the middle ear and the inner ear. And he was looking at just the design of this suture. And he had an insight, a sort of flash of inspiration, when he realized that these sutures are designed for motion. And he took this idea back to his teachers, and they somewhat dismissed it. But through a series of experiments on himself, as well as putting his hands on his patients, he became convinced that there is such a thing as cranial motion that had not been adequately described, at least in the Western text, in many Western texts, up until that time. Although, interestingly, there were some Italian and Russian physiology books at the time that did talk about small degrees of motion that could occur within between the cranial bones. But it was not really widely described. But he started to realize that there must be such a thing as cranial motion. And not only that must there be such a thing as cranial motion, but this motion has some important physiological effect, because when he was doing experiments to prevent this motion from taking place, and he did these experiments on himself, he started getting a whole range of different symptoms that you wouldn't expect just from kind of putting superficial pressures onto different parts of the head. So he also, from quite an early stage, realized that the movement that takes place within the cranial bones is not an isolated movement. It's actually part of a body-wide motion. But he identified 5 key aspects that are at the core of the body that express a subtle rhythmic motion, and that these 5 anatomical and physiological relationships are very closely associated. I'm just going to briefly outline this. So in addition to the motion that takes place at the cranial bones, Sutherland realized that on the inside of the head, there are membranes made of a tough membrane called dura mater, literally translates as tough mother. And it lines the inside of the bones, and it also partitions the different parts of the brain. So the right and left parts of the brain and the upper and lower parts of the brain are divided by these membranes. And basically, whatever the bones are doing, so these membranes are doing as well. So he saw that this membrane system is integrally connected to whatever it was that he was starting to feel and experience within the bones. He also, from an early stage, realized that the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, is not static. It is moving, it is motile. It also has a rhythmic motion that is important for its health. And the brain and the spinal cord are very closely associated with the membranes and also with the bones that surround and encase them. But this also, this functioning of the central nervous system to be able to express subtle motions is also important for our health and well-being. And also he realized from an early stage that the fluids that bathe the central nervous system, so they surround it, but they also interpenetrate it right round the head and also right the way down to the base of the spine. This is something called cerebrospinal fluid, that this is also part and parcel of this system of subtle motion that he had identified, and that the healthy motion of cerebrospinal fluid is one of the key markers for our health and well-being. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then finally, he also saw as part of this system of anatomical relationships that the sacrum here down at the base of the spine is also closely associated. The membranes that start or that are in the head also go down the spinal column and connect firmly here at the sacrum, but also the fluids that bathe the central nervous system go right the way down to the base. So basically, he also saw that the sacrum was really doing the same thing as the head. So we can say as above, so below. The sacrum was very integrally connected to this anatomical system of relationships. And as Sutherland started to realize that the subtle motions within this anatomical system were important for health, he started to develop a whole series of skills and techniques to basically resolve and restore movement in these tissues. And as he did this, he got some fantastic results. And actually, he became known as the doctor to whom all the other doctors would send their most difficult patients, that they didn't know what to do with, but they knew that this guy Sutherland was doing something strange, but he was getting great results. But basically, Sutherland he realized that if we can free up the motion of this physiological system, it has a very important influence on our health and well-being. So this is essentially where the term craniosacral comes from, relating to the cranium and also its interconnections with the sacrum at the base of the spine. And a little bit later, this work became known as craniosacral therapy. Sutherland called this the craniosacral mechanism, and then it was an American doctor in about the 1950s, whose name was Dr. Hoover, who first coined the phrase craniosacral therapy. And then it was later picked up by other practitioners and is now being taught, as you know, as a kind of we could say, an independent modality. But the name is, I have to say, a terrible name because people think that, as craniosacral practitioners, you're working with craniums and you're working with sacrums. But one of the things that Sutherland identified at an early stage is that these rhythmic motions that he first identified in this anatomical system are actually body-wide rhythmic motions. Everything in the body is expressing subtle rhythmic motion in health. And if these rhythms are not fully able to express, or if they're becoming restricted or inertial, then this affects our functioning, this affects our well-being. So it's really, as I say, not a particularly great name, but we're stuck with it. We called our school Craniosacral Therapy Educational Trust, so I think we're as guilty as anyone else for using a misleading name. But I want to just emphasize that this practice is not only working with craniums and sacrums, it's a whole body. And as I also hope to illustrate for you during the course of the next couple of hours, it is a whole person approach to treatment. When Sutherland first started his exploration, he identified a rhythmic motion, a relatively fast rhythmic motion, something that has later became known as craniosacral motion. It also was known and widely known these days as something called the cranial rhythmic impulse. And he started doing work with this rhythm, which has around 8 to 12 cycles on average a minute, which means that each minute, around 8 to 12 times, there's a kind of breathing in and a breathing out, a movement one way and a movement back. And he was getting some very good results by helping to restore motion and developing a whole range of skills, not just one, to help restore motion in that, throughout the body, helping to restore this natural rhythm. But as he developed the work, we're moving on to another chart here, he realized that this is not the only subtle rhythm that is present in the body. So this is where he started out, here called the cranial rhythmic impulse, around 8 to 12 times a minute. And it involves all the fluids and the tissues of the body. But as he went into this practice further and further, he realized that there are rhythms that underlie the cranial rhythmic impulse. And what I'd like to do now is just to walk you through, really in an introductory way, an overview of this system of rhythms, because here we can see there's one rhythm called the cranial rhythmic impulse, then underneath that there's another rhythm. It's sometimes usually known these days as the mid-tide. And then there is an even slower rhythm underneath that, which is called the long tide. And underneath that, there is something that craniosacral practitioners, particularly within the biodynamic field, also have described widely and also work with, which is that underneath all of these expressions of rhythmicity, there is a basic ground of stillness, which, if we can also connect, it enables us to connect to our kind of, we could say, our deepest source, or the ground out of which all these different expressions of life and motion arise. So I just want to kind of name maybe one or two more principles, and then I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, and then we'll start looking a little bit more specifically at the role that fluid plays and what is the fluid body, because that's the particular theme of our talk this evening. Let's see, where do I start? It's not unusual, as I just mentioned, that in craniosacral practice, particularly in the biodynamic practice, because the work is quite still, the work is quite, can I say, meditative, that both the practitioner and the patient may start to let go and settle and settle and settle and settle to a very deep place where both will become aware of or experience a profound stillness. Now, in craniosacral practice, there are lots of different types of stillness that are described. We work a lot with stillness. So, as I often say, like the Eskimos are said to have 50 words for snow because they see a lot of it. There's wet snow, dry snow, powdery snow, snow that sticks together. So in biodynamic practice, we have lots and lots of different words for stillness because there's many different levels of stillness. There's many different types of stillness. But this stillness that I'm referring to now, here it's referred to as dynamic stillness. It was given this name by a student of Dr. Sutherland, whose name was Dr. Becker. This refers to what I sometimes just call the mother of all stillnesses. It's the stillness that is underneath everything. It is the stillness that is there prior to any kind of expressions of life and motion. And it's from this basic ground of stillness that life starts to express itself as motion. There is a very intimate, close relationship between life and motion. Just on a very basic level, here's a sure test that you can use if you want to determine whether an organism is alive or dead. Have a look, see if it moves. If it moves, it's alive. If it doesn't move, it's dead. Well, okay, so that's pretty black and white, either alive or dead. But maybe there's a bit of middle ground in there. So, for example, thank God, we're all alive, we're all doing okay, but maybe we're not fully alive. Maybe we're not fully able to express our subtle motions of life. And this can be a key factor in, can I say, um, laying the ground for the development of symptoms, disease, and pathology. So in the practice, when we start to have some kind of direct experience of this deep stillness that underlies everything, actually, by definition, what we're doing is starting to come back into some connection to that which is at our essence, that which is at our deepest nature. And this is a very powerful therapeutic principle, because when we do reconnect with this deep stillness, it's not a personal stillness, I want to say. It's not just a stillness that's in me or a stillness that's just in you. It's a stillness that is in everything. When we reconnect to this, we reconnect to the very source out of which which is there present within us. And therapeutically, this is incredibly powerful. Therapeutically, things can start to get reset and reorganized. And the analogy that I usually use these days is that if you have something going wrong with your telephone or your modem or your computer or your Wi-Fi, and you call the helpline and say, look, having this problem, things are cutting in or cutting out or whatever it is. What is the first thing they always tell you to do? Well, the first thing they always tell you to do is turn it off, switch it off, wait a few minutes, and then switch it back on again. And that seems to sort out quite a lot of the problems. Well, we work in the same way. That's this is a physiological truth, not just a kind of a mechanical truth in terms of our electrical equipment. So this is quite a profound therapeutic principle that we work with a lot, and we'll do a lot of training around this for those of you who do come on the training courses. And let's say I'm just going to give an overview on this. I'm not going to try and spend too long on this sort of introductory part. But this stillness is something that has also been described in many other fields of practice, and I would say many other fields of life. The quantum physicists are also describing that at the very sort of essence of all manifestations, not of all material substance, there is what they call the 0-point field. It's a kind of a field of stillness and a field of spaciousness that is present in everything. And I think that we're probably talking about the same thing. And this is also something that's been described in many spiritual traditions. Within the Buddhist tradition, for example, there is a description of and a kind of an essential property that we each have inside us, something which in Sanskrit is called shunyata. And shunyata is usually translated as emptiness. But the literal translation, as I've been told by various Buddhist teachers, is that within that Sanskrit word, there is also the meaning of luminosity. So it's not just a kind of a nihilistic emptiness of nothingness. There's also a sense of potentiality. It's where our full potential is also resides. So this is something that has been described in spiritual traditions, in meditative practices for many, many centuries, but it's something that's not that unusual to come into contact with and to, start to synchronize with when we're in clinical practice. But it's from this basic ground of stillness or spaciousness that life is expressed as motion. And that very first stirring of life is a slow movement that also we do quite a lot of therapeutic work with. It's something called the long tide. And the long tide is a slow movement. You can see here it has 100-second cycles. That means that for one phase of motion, it takes about 50 seconds. There's a movement one way for about 50 seconds, and then a movement back for 50 seconds. And this seems to be a sort of a fundamental pulse or a fundamental rhythm of life that at some deep level regulates us, and probably does more than just regulate us. There are many people who in our field who also sense or experience the long tide as being an essential creative force, that it's something that's been primarily described as creating us during our embryological development, rather than just our embryological development being a factor of our genetics or our DNA, that there are actually organizing forces within our embryological development that somehow shape us and unfold us. So the long tide is seen also as a sort of a primary regulatory and creative impulse. Again, if we connect to it and the clinical kind of experiences that we have when we do synchronize with the long tide, is that it has a profound therapeutic benefit. As you start to connect to the long tide and it starts to move through you and move through your body, it can literally reorganize and change the function of dysregulated fluids, dysregulated tissues, and bring us back to a better experience of health. So there is this is really a kind of a proposal. I won't say that it's something that's ever, that's been proven, but it's, there seems to be some kind of organizing force, some kind of organizing matrix or organizing blueprint that is carried within the rhythms of the long tide, because when it comes into play, people get better, people feel better. One of the features of the long tide that we experience is that it's not personal. It's more of a wider rhythm. It's an environmental rhythm, rather than being a question of I have my long tide and you have your long tide and she has her long tide. That it's more of a movement that takes place within the natural world. So it's not so much that we are expressing the long tide or we're breathing the long tide. It's more a question that the long tide is expressing us or breathing us. So it's something that we experience as happening within a very wide field, really a field that encompasses the whole of the natural world. And we're in constant interface, whether or not we know that or whether or not we're conscious of that. We're all individualized human beings, but we're also in constant interchange and in constant interface with, the whole of the environment, the whole of the natural world, and maybe, who knows, even beyond just this world as well. Maybe, there are sort of, can I say, planetary influences and influences from different different parts of the solar system and even different parts of the universe. But we're in constant interchange. This is the thing with our environment. We're not isolated, separate human beings. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we go through the evening. But we are also individuated. Maybe at some level we're all connected by these universal forces or these environmental forces, but we are also individuated human beings. And so the understanding that I want to propose is that these life forces, which are really universal forces, they're not just local forces, but they manifest through each of us, each living organism. And as they manifest through each of us at an individual level, it generates another rhythmic movement, which here is referred to as the mid-tide. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this because it's here, this is what in biodynamic practice is often referred to as the fluid body. It's the fluid body that expresses these life forces at an individual level. And I'll come on and talk a bit more about that later. So the mid-tide is really an expression of life's forces within us. And the medium for that, as we're going to talk a little bit more, is fluid. That fluid is the carrier of life. It's fluid that carries our vital forces, the vital forces of life throughout the body as a regulatory function. And this is something that's been known for, can I say, thousands of years within, certainly within traditional Chinese medicine, also within Ayurvedic medicine, where the vital forces of life are also seen to be carried within the fluid. But this is also a common understanding that we have within biodynamics. So I'm not going to talk too much more about this now because this is going to be my main theme that I'm going to come on to shortly. But then where Sutherland started out, which was this faster rhythmic movement that he called the cranial rhythmic impulse, he then started to realize that this is actually more of a superficial rhythm. It's more something that's happening on the surface of the ocean as a result of different waveforms and different influences, rather than these other rhythms and tides that he saw having a deeper regulatory function if we can connect to them and if we can support and promote them. There is an emphasis, I would say, within biodynamic practice to work more with here what we call the mid-tide or the fluid body, as well as the long tide, and as well as the stillness that underlies it all. But we also do work with the cranial rhythmic impulse. Basically, it's a question of just meeting that patient's physiology wherever they are. It's not a question for me to dictate what I need to work with. It's about listening to what is available through that patient's physiology, what they're expressing, and then meeting them in whichever way is appropriate. So these three rhythms that I've described basically operate through three fields of function, or we can say three bodies. This is a sort of a schematic diagram of a human being with a midline, but there's the physical body. It's what's underneath the skin. And what's underneath the skin is basically what we start to appreciate if we have a fairly localized attention, feeling what's going on inside the body, we tend to feel and experience the faster rhythm of the cranial rhythmic impulse. But also that we don't just end at the skin. Here we can see that there is a field, we can call it a biofield. In craniosacral biodynamics, we usually call it a field of potency that surrounds the physical body, but that it includes the physical body as well. And this is something called the fluid body, and I'm going to be unfolding more of that as we go along. But then we've also got this much wider body that I was referring to earlier on when I was talking about the long tide. The long tide operates through a much wider, vast field of action. And this is something that is called the tidal body. So we have not just one body, we have different bodies, different fields of function, and they're all, of course, critically important. And they are all in interchange. They are all interfacing with each other. So just as a single cell has to let in oxygen and nutrients in order to function to its optimal capacity, and the single cell has to be able to get rid of its byproducts of cellular activity and wastes. And if it's not able to do that, if a single cell does not have a healthy interchange with its environment, that cell will suffer. And, if that continues, that cell will die. But so this is a truth that happens really from a microcosmic level of function right the way through to a systemic and a whole organism level of function. So not only does each cell, but each field and each organism has to be in constant interchange with its environment. So as human beings, we're in interface, as I mentioned, with this wider field that we call the long tide. If we're not able to, as it were, be open to life's forces that come into us from the environment and to be able to utilize those, we will suffer. We will start to become dysregulated. And this is a situation that we frequently see in clinical practice. So okay, so basically, just to summarize, each of these bodies has to be in dynamic interchange, otherwise health starts to break down. Now, earlier, I touched on the fact that water or fluid is a kind of a medium that carries these life forces in the body. And basically, we are mostly water. No disrespect to anybody here, but you are around 70% water. You're essentially, can I say, a bag of fluid walking around with a few more solidy bits that you're just not going to collapse onto the ground in a puddle. You've got some form, you've got some substance, but you are primarily water. It says here 75% of the brain is fluid, 83% of the blood. The bones, I've read a little bit more than 22%, but here it says the living bone is also full of fluid, it's full of life. It's full of the potency that is carried within the fluid, which is essential as a regulatory function. So this is a quote from a Nobel Prize winner. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine in 1937. His name was Albert Szent-Györgyi. He summarized this very beautifully. He said, water is life's matter and matrix, mother and medium. There is no life without water. So the movement of water, the healthy movement and interchange of fluid in the body is one of the key factors that will determine whether or not we're able to function healthily. And this kind of connection between water and life, I think we kind of know it instinctively as well. When the NASA scientists go looking for signs of life on the moon or looking for signs of life on Mars, what is the first thing that they look for? Always they look for water. If they're looking for signs of life on other planets, it's water that sustains life. So it's the fluid that carries the vital forces of life. When we pass on, when we die, when we take our last breath, movement stops and we dry up. There's no fluid left. So there's this intrinsic, if you can say, unbreakable relationship between water and life. And this is something that can become dysregulated in the body and have important physiological and clinical consequences. But fluid can also become imprinted by experience. Okay, here are some pictures of tears, and these tears have been taken and they've been frozen, and the crystals within these tears have been photographed, and they're very different. The crystals that are formed within tears of grief are very different to tears of change or tears of onion or laughter, joyful tears. So just again to sort of throw this in, that fluid also carries experience. Okay, it has a memory. Now, there's been quite a lot of research. Some of this research is, can I say, controversial, but a lot of the research looks pretty good to show that the fluid in our bodies can register experience and it can hold experience. 75 to 80% of the brain is fluid. This is, I'm sorry if you're a little bit squeamish, but this is a real photograph of a brain, and you can see just how juicy is it. But also when we look, this is a cross section here. This is showing the areas of cerebrospinal fluid which is present in the brain. And so it's not just the brain tissue here, that is full of fluid. There are all these spaces within the brain that are bathed in fluid that help to cushion the brain. But this fluid at the core of the body was given kind of particular significance by Dr. Sutherland, because he saw this relationship between fluid and life's forces, but he saw that the cerebrospinal fluid that bathes the central nervous system and surrounds the central nervous system, this has particular significance. This carries the potency that regulates us at a core level. Dr. Sutherland referred to cerebrospinal fluid as like the sap in a tree. It's that essential fluidic motion that regulates us at a very deep level. And here's a quote from Sutherland. He said, "Within that cerebrospinal fluid, there is an invisible element that I refer to as the breath of life." Sutherland took this phrase, breath of life, actually from the book of Genesis. The quote from the book of Genesis is something like, the breath of life is referred to as some kind of vivifying, animating force that differentiates us from a corpse. It's that basic kind of life principle that expresses within the body. And he said, I want you to visualize this breath of life as a fluid within this fluid, something that has potency as the thing that makes it move. Visualize a potency, an intelligent potency that is more intelligent than your own human mentality. Wow. Okay, there's a lot of words there. Let me just repeat that last sentence because I want to kind of pick up on this. Visualize a potency, an intelligent potency that is more intelligent than your own human mentality. Okay, so what is he saying here? He's saying that the fluid, and in particular, he's referring to the cerebrospinal fluid, carries an intelligent potency. It's the life force that makes everything move. But this potency is profoundly intelligent. It carries some kind of organizing principle. I referred to this earlier as a kind of blueprint for health. And that this is far more intelligent than we are. We are, we think that we're very clever, at least some of us do, but we're not. This is just, sometimes we're probably a bit too clever for our own good. But what Sutherland is referring to here is that this regulatory principle, this life force, this potency that is expressed within the fluids is far more intelligent than we can possibly be. And as practitioners, this is something that we can listen for, and we can cooperate with, and we can support, but we can't direct it. We can't manipulate it. We can't go in with a kind of a mental attitude of, somehow we know better and we're going to kind of sort this potency out and fix this fluid flow and fix these motions within this human being. That there is something within us, a deeper intelligence that is carried within the fluids that fundamentally creates, maintains, and supports our health. And this is something that we can learn how to listen to, how to work with. We can learn to approach it, I can say, with a sense of humility, a sense of listening, rather than, as something that is highly intelligent, far more intelligent than we are. So, just to kind of summarize, the fluid body in craniosacral biodynamic practice refers to the fluids that are present within the body that carry life's forces, but that this field of potency or life principle also extends beyond the body. In other words, we don't end at the skin. We are more than just the physical body. The physical body, of course, is a critically significant, important, can I say, awesome field, but that it's within a wider field, which is within a wider field, which is within a wider field. And all of these fields are in dynamic interchange. And as long as all these fields are healthily in dynamic interchange, then we can said to be in a state of good health and balance and regulation. So, like I say, we don't end at the skin. Now, this has been widely measured. There's been, electromagnetic fields that have been measured outside of the body that extend a number of feet outside the body, and that showing that we interact through these fields, that one person's field, for example, can have an effect on another person's brain function, on another person's nervous system. I think we all know this intuitively, don't we? There are some people, perhaps we come into contact with them and we don't even necessarily have to touch them, but when we come into their presence, we start to kind of, we sort of feel better about ourselves, or we start to connect to ourselves, or we start to, sort of let go of something. And then there are other people, maybe their fields are somewhat chaotic, and even, they walk into the room. I remember I used to work in a clinical practice a number of years ago, and there was a lovely lady who was the manager or owner of the practice. But she was incredibly chaotic, and everywhere she went, there was sort of chaos happening around her. You would just walk into a room and you wouldn't even know, you could just feel her. It was like an immediately, you were, at least my response was, oh gosh, okay, I need to just kind of come into myself here, because I had to kind of accommodate for this, because, there was all this kind of chaos going on within her field. But I think this happens all the time, that we're constantly interacting through our fields of function, and that these fields extend beyond the body. I don't know if you've ever had the experience, for example, where you may have sat on a bus or a train and somebody's come and sat behind you, and you may have had no visual contact with them. You don't even know, man, woman, young, old, whatever. but you have a sense, you can kind of feel, oh, do I feel a bit concerned? Do I feel a bit worried about this person? Or do I get a nice sense of them? Or do you know what I mean? So I think we're constantly interacting through our fields. It's just that this is something that we will work with and recognize and learn how to sense and learn how to feel when we come on the training courses that we're doing. So I thought that just as an initial exercise, we could do some just simple exercise around sensing the field. And this is actually an exercise, we're going to do it now just individually because we're all online. But when we're in the classroom, we also do this exercise in pairs. We can kind of start to sense into each other's fields and move towards each other from a distance and see how that feels and see when it is we start to kind of feel the presence of the other person and things like that. But as a simple starting point, I'm going to recommend just kind of rub your hands quite vigorously, okay? And then stretch your hands, okay? I mean, you can just sort of bend your fingers and just see if you can get the circulation going, get the blood circulation going in your hands. And, you can pull your fingers a little bit and just to really kind of just get your hands coming a little bit more alive, maybe rub them again, just kind of, front and back like that. And then just try something. Your hands probably feel a little bit tingly now, but just bring your hands wide and then start to bring your hands. I know my hands are a bit off camera now because the camera's a bit, but just start to kind of bring your hands in from a distance. Now I can start to feel when I'm about here, I can start to feel like a little sort of resistance or a little buoyancy between my hands. It's as if, from here, I can just feel a little something. But when I come to this place, it's like there's a little bit of like almost like a little bit of pushing back. It's a little bit of resistance there within the field. Yeah. And this shows me that there is some kind of feel between my hands. It's not just this, I'm not making any physical contact between my two hands, but that there is, but already I'm sort of making contact between my two hands, maybe, at least a few feet apart, yeah? And if I start to just maybe bring my hands in a little bit more, then I can start to feel, okay, well, I'm actually entering that field. Now, you might notice this as like a sense of tingling or just a little sense of buoyancy between your hands. Just experiment with that. Yeah, just play with that and see if you can sense that. Later, we're not going to do that this evening, but later we're going to, maybe if you have a chance, you can do this with a friend as well and just sort of approach each other, and move towards each other and see how far apart it is where you start to sense each other's field. Yeah, but this is what we call the fluid body. The fluid body is this field of function. It has a shape. It has a form. It's a subtle form. It's not a physical form, but it has a form. But it can also become locked up and it can also become dysregulated. And if it does become dysregulated, this can have significant effect on our sense of health and well-being. So in practice, we can do quite a lot of work with this. But I really want to emphasize this point. The fluid body, as we call it, is not just this electromagnetic or potency field that is outside the skin. It's not just that which surrounds the body. It's something that includes the body. Yeah. So it includes the fluids and consequently all of the living tissues in the body, because all the living tissues of the body are largely fluidic, so they carry this potency within the body. And that this field of function that includes the space around the body, but it also includes the tissues and the fluids within the body, it's not static, it's moving, it's rhythmic. It expresses this motion that I described earlier as the mid-tide, an average. It has a bit of variance, but it's an average movement around 2.5 times a minute. That there is one phase of movement, we call it an inhalation, then another phase of movement, we call it a settling or an exhalation. So that's happening constantly within the field around the body, but also within the body, within the potency in the body, within the fluids within the body, and generating a subtle movement within the tissues of the body as well. And we do quite a lot of work with this in biodynamic practice, because this is a kind of, can be a really useful starting point, because at this, I think you'll have gathered from the talk so far, we have many levels of function. We're not just we're not just functioning at one level. There's many, many levels. But at this level of function, this is really expressing life's forces at an individual level. So you will have your mid-tide, I will have my mid-tide, but the quality and the motion that is there, the amplitude, the fullness, the sense of potency that gets expressed within the mid-tide, the shape of the fluid body, we'll look a few minutes at some other pictures, the patterns that might be expressed within the fluid body, these all have an influence on our state of health and well-being, because it is these subtle motions of fluid and potency that help to regulate our bodies at a deep level of function. Okay. Maybe at this stage, I'm going to stop screen share. I'm going to show you some more slides, but maybe at this stage, I will open up to any questions that you might have. And maybe you can just, if you've got questions, you might want to write them in the chat box. Maybe there's something I've said that isn't very clear, or you would like to get clarified, or that has been confusing. Should we also let people unmute themselves, Fabio, as well? Maybe we can do that. So if you do want to ask a question, you can either unmute yourself, turn on your sound, or just write something in the chat box. How are you doing? Let me just ask you that. All okay so far. I've got a question. It's been sent to me as a direct message from Kim. What is your felt sense of the long tide or mid tide? Well, actually, we're going to do a little exercise with that a little bit later. So, I'll talk about the mid tide certainly a little bit later, because that's the fluid body. But the felt sense of the long tide is a sense of connectivity. It's a sense of connecting to something that is both inside us and outside of us, that has a profound regulatory function. It's an expression of health. And so actually, I think that when you're experiencing the long tide, my experience certainly, and I think it's a common experience, is that it's like, wow, you're kind of coming back home, you're coming back to yourself, you're coming back to something which is a fundamental deep expression of health within yourself. And it's a subtle movement. It's like as I say, my felt sense of it, I touched on it earlier, is that the long tide is a vast field of action. This is, by the way, not particularly the theme of tonight's talk, but I'm going to try to answer the question, but that it's a vast field of action. And it's more a sense that it's something that just moves through us, that if we're open to it, we can just allow it. And when we allow it, can I say, sometimes it brings tears to our eyes, because it's profound and it's beautiful, and you know, it brings us back to a sense of health and well-being. So I hope that answers at least part of your question now, Kim. The other part, a little bit later, I plan to do another exercise around the so-called mid-tide or fluid body. So maybe rather than asking me what I feel, I might then turn the question and say, well, what do you feel? We can check into that later on. Okay, great. So I've also got another direct message. Renato, feels same as understanding I have developed over the years. I'm pleased we're in agreement that all elements of our form create a composite electromagnetic field that we can express through our hands, and we can support the system of another person. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any questions that you have? Is there anything else you would like? Gosh, everybody's sending me direct messages. Maybe they don't want their messages to be public, but I'm going to answer them anyway. Claire, would you say that people who are particularly sensitive may need rebalancing more often? Well, it's a very good question. One of the things that we start with in biodynamic practice is starting by taking care of ourselves, starting by finding a way to center ourselves, finding some kind of okayness, some kind of resource, some kind of relationship and orientation. Because without that, it's very easy to become dysregulated. So, you know, we spend a lot of time, I mean, you know, first seminar, second seminar, basically looking at various ways that we can orient ourselves as practitioners as a starting point, because it is, you know, some of these forces that we feel can feel quite strong and powerful. But my experience is that if we are centered, and this is also work in progress, just to say, Claire, it's not something that's just you can snap your fingers and sort out. You know, it's a practice that you need to do over time. But there's also a principle that we use in biodynamic practice. It's called the neutral, it's called the practitioner neutral. Sorry, I'm just looking at only, okay, sorry, yeah, thanks. Just reading another message coming in. Basically what the practitioner neutral refers to is that the practitioner can start to let go of needs, expectations. You know, I want you to feel better. I want you to like me. I want you to, you know, whatever it is. I want you to, I want you to, you know, I want to kind of help you to, well, we all have the motivation to help people, but, you know, emotionally it can kind of get in the way. You know, if we kind of have an emotional investment in whether somebody is going to respond to anything we're doing, you know, that can be quite tricky territory. So the neutral refers to a sense of letting go and coming into presence. And when we do that, there is an inherent, I would say, protection around that, because then things can come and things can go. We may sense things at a very deep level, but they don't necessarily stick. So you become, I call it a Teflon practitioner. If you know what Teflon frying pans are, they're non-stick pans. So it's like you're a non-stick practitioner. You may feel things deeply. You may go into, you know, of course, you know, you may resonate very deeply with what's going on with your client, but it doesn't necessarily stick. Sometimes, of course, it does stick. You know, we're complex human beings, aren't we? And sometimes somebody will come in and, you know, maybe they will have a trauma or an experience and it'll kind of touch you or resonate with you deeply. But also what that means is that at the same time, we have to have a deep commitment to do work with ourselves. And sometimes we need our own support, our own resources, our own supervision as well. But most of the time, I think it's quite, you know, I would say that if we're able to orient ourselves, if we're able to find our, you know, orientation, our what we call our own fulcrums, if we're able to approach with a sense of our own okayness and with our own neutrality. Now, all of that sounds very simple and it's very easy to say, but of course can be bloody difficult to practice. But if we can find those things, actually we can feel, so many things, but it doesn't necessarily stick. Anyway, it's a long answer to a short question. Is that okay, Claire? Yeah? Yeah. Of course, the sensitivity is very good. But also we need to find some kind of orientation and balance with that sensitivity. Otherwise, yes, we can get ourselves into difficult situations and start to pick up on, what's called vicarious trauma, where we pick it up from other people if we're not taking care of ourselves correctly. So these are important principles that we need to pay attention to. Okay, great. Thank you, Renata, for just saying that the only way that people can message me is to send a direct message. I think the other option may not be there for this evening's meeting, but that's fine. You can send messages to me. Are there any other questions that you might have, either through chat or by speaking, or shall we move into the next phase? How are you doing? Is this making sense? A few nods. Good. All right. Fantastic. Great. So in that case, I'm going to go back to screen share. So where's my presentation gone? There it is. And I'm going to show you a few more slides, and then we'll do another exercise a little bit later. So, okay, so there's my screen share. Let me just get to the pointer and then to play. So, great. So, as I said earlier, what's happened here? Yeah. Dr. Sutherland was once asked, can you describe this whole field of what he called it primary respiratory motion, as he saw that these rhythmic motions are essentially a primary life breath. He was asked this question, can you describe this? And he drew a picture. And he drew a picture of a house under the ocean with its doors and windows open. Now, this picture it's not the picture that Sutherland drew. It's a sort of an interpretation of that was drawn by a colleague in Italy. But he drew this house with its doors and windows open, and he used to refer to the long tide and this wider field of primary respiration. He called it the ocean of primary respiration, or the ocean all around us. He saw that everything, the whole environment, is teeming with energy, with potency, with life, that we're in interchange, and that we're like the house. And if our windows and doors are open, we can let that in, and we can become restored, we can become revitalized, we can become healed. But of course, sometimes those, can I say, our doors and windows are not always open. And so we're not so available for these therapeutic forces of life, that we can call it, or the breath of life. But when we are, the potentiality for health and healing is probably limitless. I mean, I don't know, I'm not making false claims, because you can't, but sometimes people get better from the most ridiculous conditions, things that they shouldn't get better from, from advanced stages of cancer, from AIDS, from, but things that, people have been written off. Somehow people make recoveries from these things. Maybe, and I've witnessed this a few times in my practice, not so often, but when it happens, it's like, bloody hell, how did that happen? But, something changes, something shifts, and, something gets reorganized, and, and there's a change that takes place that affects that person's physiology at a deep level. So Sutherland didn't use the expression the long tide. He called it the ocean of primary respiration, that we all live in this ocean of life and that we're in this interface with it, and that our fluid body, our sort of individuated form that extends beyond the skin needs to be in dynamic interchange with that. So here we have another image of these three fields. Yeah, there's the fluid body, the fluid field surrounding the physical body, but it includes the physical body. And it's really, as I say, just to remind, it's an expression of potency that is expressed within the fluids of the body. It's the fluid that is the medium for life's organizing forces. But that potency also extends beyond the skin. And if it's all moving well, if it's all breathing well, this is something that we want to listen for, and also something that we want to support if there's some kind of dysregulation. So this is a quote from the great philosopher and teacher Alan Watts. He said, "You and I are as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean." So it's like, we're all individual waveforms, but we're part of this ocean of life. Fundamentally, we're not separate from it. And when we come back into that as an experiential level, all kinds of things can start to open up to us. This is a beautiful quote from the great Canadian singer and poet Leonard Cohen. He said, "If you don't become the ocean, you'll be seasick every day." What a wonderful quote. So we can start to kind of connect our fluid body to this wider ocean of primary respiration. And, maybe then we stop becoming seasick, according to Leonard Cohen. So what do we feel? Well, in craniosacral practice, in biodynamic practice, we use our hands. We use light touch. You can also feel some of these fields off the body, but we do make, light touch on the body because we can also feel for the expression of these subtle motions within the fluids, within the tissues at a physiological level of function. If everything is working well, you may feel through the fluid body a kind of motion like you see here on the left picture, that there is a movement in one way. We call it inhalation, a rising, and a widening side to side. And then there is a movement back down, which we call exhalation. And that movement is happening with fullness and with balance and with symmetry and with a good sense of vitality. And so this here on the kind of left of your screen is a kind of a healthy system, one that has become, not necessarily patterned by stress, trauma, dysregulation. But here on the right is what we commonly feel is that this movement of fluid and potency within the body becomes quite disordered, not just within the body, but also within the field around the body, because it's a continuous field. Okay, it's a unified field of function. It's not just inside the body, it's not just outside the body. It's a unified field of function that it can become disordered. You can start to get currents and whirlpools and restrictions and all kinds of things going on. And so we may hold places of relative densification within the body. This is just a picture from a Japanese garden of a rock. But you can see around the rock, there are all these kind of wave patterns that happen. So you can get these fluctuations that go on around these places of densification. And here at this place of densification, there's relative stasis, there's relative inertia. This is a place that's not fully expressing life's movements and life's forces and life's organizing principle. And so in biodynamic practice, we see this kind of scenario, we call them inertial fulcrums, as being the primary precursor to the development of disease and pathology. And if we can find ways to resolve these places of densification, of stasis, of inertia, and help to restore normal motion, then people get better. That's the one of the great principles. So, when you have a rock in a river, you see the fluid has to kind of, move around it in all kinds of concentric and eccentric patterns. And it can create all kinds of places of dysregulation. But, if we can find a way to resolve whatever it is that's holding the rock, whatever it is that's holding that inertia in place, then you can start to get a more healthy, balanced expression of fluid and motion going through the body. And this kicks into one of the principles that was outlined by the founder of osteopathy, who, can I say, was very appropriately called Dr. Still. And he was a remarkable visionary. And he placed a great emphasis in his development of osteopathy at the movement of fluid. He saw that the movement of fluid is absolutely essential for our health and well-being. He called it the rule of the artery. So basically, as long as the arterial flow is able to happen without impediment, oxygen and nutrients can be delivered to everything in the cell, as long as the veins and the lymph is able to carry away fluids and dispose of or return to the heart accordingly, as long as that interchange is taking place, cells function well. But Sutherland was also a great vitalist. He wasn't just a mechanic. He had a great understanding of the mechanics of the body, but he also had a great appreciation, the fact that we are, we're human beings that are driven by life's forces, that he recognized the presence of the life force as being an essential ingredient in our sense of health and well-being. And he said that sickness effectively is caused by the stoppage of some supply or fluid, and this is the other bit, or quality of life. So he's talking about this quality of life, this organizing life principle carried within the fluids. If this is in some way arrested, then this is the primary precursor to the development of disease and pathology. And if we can resolve that, then people get better. This is a quote from the 19th century, early 20th century British philosopher, Walter Russell. He said, "We are all electric creatures floating in the electric sea of this electric universe." So we all have this vitality, this potency, which I've been talking about. And Sutherland referred to this vital force within the fluids as the potency of the tide. The tide he referred to as this rhythmic motion that moves in rhythmic cycles in its phases of inhalation and exhalation. But he said it's the vitality or the potency that is carried within the fluids. This has more power than any force that you can apply from the outside. In other words, we can use these vital forces, we can use this potency as a therapeutic medium, as a therapeutic principle. We can use this rather than doing things to the patient, directing, manipulating, whatever. We can use this intrinsic force, this potency that's carried within the fluids, within the tide. We can use this as a, to create change. If we follow it, if we support it, if we can find ways to synchronize to it, and when needed to subtly augment it, this potency is what will make the correction. It's not the practitioner that is going to make the correction. It is this intrinsic potency, this vital force that is carried within these rhythmic motions. So Dr. Still also encouraged us to find the health, This potency, these rhythmic motions are essentially expressions of health. This is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Still. He said, to find health should be the objective for the physician. Anyone can find disease. Well, I think that's true, isn't it? We can look into any one of us for long enough and we'll find something that's not quite right, or, you know, whatever. But what about finding the health? What about supporting what's right? Yeah, supporting what works. And this is one of the really, I would say, I don't know if it's there in other therapeutic approaches. If it is, I haven't come across it. But one of the principles within biodynamic craniosacral work is not to get rid of the problem, but to support the expression of health. If we can find a way to support the expression of health, the problem goes. The problem, you know, will dissolve, it'll resolve, it'll dissipate. Yeah. So we're not trying, you know, so this is really the focus. And as I mentioned earlier, these rhythms of primary respiration, and this also including the rhythms that take place within the fluid body that I've been describing, these are expressions of health. So when we synchronize to that motion and we can support it, then we start to see profound changes going on in our patients. And in the English language, this is very well expressed as well, because the word health in the English language comes from the same root as the word whole in the Latin language. So from the Latin root, the word health and the word whole, they actually mean the same thing. So to literally, you know, in terms of the origin of this language, to be healthy means to be whole. To find the health means to orient to the wholeness of the human being, not just to dissect them and look at them as little parts, which of course is what takes place, unfortunately, so much in modern medicine these times. I mean, I have colleagues who are working regularly in hospitals, and, you know, of course, people are really doing their best and, you know, usually doing a fantastic and wonderful job. So I'm certainly not critical here, but I just want to illustrate that, you know, sometimes even, you know, it's in busy hospital practices, you'll talk about the gallbladder in bed 23. You know, we've been sort of reduced to what's wrong with us, you know. But it's not a holistic view, you know, it's not a view that incorporates the sense of wholeness and health. And when we do start to orient to our own wholeness, and we do start to orient to the wholeness that is in the patient, this also is one of the foundations of practice. And I want to just introduce you to that particular foundation in our next exercise. We can't go too far tonight in a, you know, in just a short talk, but I hope I can give you a little flavor and a little taste of, you know, what we explore when we go into this work more deeply. And this is also was recognized, this is another pioneer within the field of craniosacral biodynamics and biodynamic osteopathy. His name was Dr. James Jallis. And he said, one must see one's position relative to the whole and not try to destroy the disease, but to support the health of the whole. Yeah, I think I've just been saying that. So, you know, so if we've got some kind of dysregulated part of ourselves, you know, let's say some, you know, it can be a pain, it can be a disease, it can be a pathology, but if we can help to hold that in relationship to wholeness and health, this is profound. Okay. So maybe I'll just stop there again for a moment, and then just to see if there are any other questions, and then we'll go into, have I stopped sharing? Has that stopped sharing? Can you just tell me? Yes? Okay, very good. Okay. Yeah, we're going to go into an exercise now, and then we'll do a little bit of kind of concluding. But is there anything you'd like to get clarified? Is there anything I've said that you'd like to pick up on? Also, you're very free to argue with me as well. we don't have to agree with each other, but how are you doing? All okay? Any comment, any question? Please feel free to write or to come on. I just want to create a little bit of space for this. Ron, you've got your hand up. Does that mean you want to say something? No. You pressed your, okay. That's great. All right. Claire says it feels very similar to the principles of homeopathy. I think you're right. Sometimes I refer to biodynamic craniosacral practice as homeopathic osteopathy because it's minimal dose. You're using very light touch. You're using minuscule movements. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of, there are some resonances there. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and you're a homeopath, by the way. Okay, great. Very welcome. Oh, Alessandra, I don't speak Spanish. Hola, that's all I can say to you. You've given me a question in Spanish, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't translate that. Maybe somebody else can, but I can't translate that. Anything else, or shall we move on? Ready to move? Okay, so I'm going to go back a little bit to screen share. Oh, she says she wants to listen in Spanish. Thank you, Heike. Oh, I can't help you to listen in Spanish, Alexandra. If I spoke Spanish, I could help you, but maybe you can find a way to get some translation of this yourself. So let's come back to screen share, and then we'll move into a little practice. Okay, so we're going to just do a little exercise around orienting to wholeness, okay? And like I said earlier, we don't end at the skin. So if we're going to, when we talk about orienting to wholeness, we're not going to just orient to the whole of the physical body. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise to orient to the whole of the fluid body that includes the physical body, but that also extends beyond the skin. Actually, I think I'm just going to stop sharing because I think it's easier just to talk about this. That's stopped sharing, hasn't it? Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just kind of walk you through this, yeah? And it's going to be experiential. It's going to be kind of like a meditation, if you like. And what I'd like you to do is to just get yourself into some, kind of comfortable position. Yeah, maybe just feel your sitting bones on the chair or on the cushion or on the floor, wherever you are. And you can do this in a few different ways, but one way is you can maybe put your hands lightly onto your thighs, onto the top of your quadriceps muscles. And just start to bring your attention to the sensations in your body. Okay, now, what you can do to help with that is do a little bit of a body scan. Maybe you can start at your feet and just notice, okay, how are my feet on the floor right now? Do I notice any difference? Left, right. Just notice, yeah, okay, that's a sense of my feet. Maybe then bring your attention to your legs. And that's a sense of my legs as well. Maybe again, you feel something on one side. Maybe there's pleasant sensations. Maybe there's unpleasant sensations. Maybe there's even painful sensations that you start to experience. But see if you can just notice and acknowledge whatever's present. And I also want to say, I've not met many of you or most of you before, so I don't know you. I don't know what your needs are. If there's anything that I'm saying that feels uncomfortable for you, or that sort of just takes you into a place that feels a bit difficult, please take responsibility to self-regulate. Just take a few deep breaths, get up, move, take a stretch, take a drink. You don't have to follow what I'm saying, because it might be that there's things that are coming up for you that it doesn't feel appropriate to kind of explore the things that I'm taking you into. So please just kind of check whether or not you're feeling okay with the things that I'm guiding you here. And if not, pay more attention to your experience than to what I'm talking about. So, okay, so maybe you can bring your attention now, maybe to your sitting bones and to your pelvis. And just notice the sensations that are there. And see if you can do this without any kind of judgment, without any need, without any censorship. So taking away the sort of idea of what you think you should be feeling or what you ought to be feeling, and really just listening and paying attention to whatever it is that's going on in your body. Just kind of being with that if you can. Maybe noticing what's going on in your belly. Just allowing the sensations if you can. Again, maybe there's good sensations, easy sensations, or possibly painful or unpleasant sensations. But as long as it's not too much for you, just see if you're able to kind of be with that. And just allow your body to do what it wants to do. As we said earlier, we just touched on this, there's something incredibly intelligent that is working through us, far more intelligent than our own human mentality. So, maybe we can just listen to the body without having to manage, without having to control, without having to censor, but just kind of allowing and letting go, allowing the body to do what it wants to do, and noticing, well, what do you notice in your chest right now? What's running there for you? What's running in your back? Can you bring your attention maybe to your lower back, and then maybe the middle part of your back? Maybe you have some pain, maybe you have some discomfort, maybe you have a nice sense of ease and buoyancy. But can you just acknowledge, just notice, all right, yeah, that's what I feel in my lower back right now. That's what I feel in my middle back right now. As I say, without censorship or judgment. Maybe you could bring your attention to your upper back and your neck and your shoulders. Your arms and your hands. And just noticing and being with whatever sensations are present without judgment. Just acknowledging, okay, yeah, this is what my body wants to do right now. You can bring your attention to your head and to your face, your eyes. Again, just letting things be as they are. And what's interesting, I mean, again, this is a big subject, but a starting point in our practice is to start where we are and just acknowledge that wherever we are, it has its own intelligence. Maybe we can try to support greater levels of intelligence and function to express, but we can't argue with the body. We need to somehow kind of make friends with it and listen to it. And so see if you can just acknowledge. Don't need to do anything about it, but just acknowledge, okay, yeah, this is what I feel in my body right now. This is how it is for me. And what I'd like you to do now is to not only bring your attention into your body, but see if you can, as it were, the image is maybe just instead of having like a blinkered vision, I'm not talking just about eye vision, but just kind of open up your attention, not only to what's going on under your skin, but just open up your attention to what's happening in the field around your body. Can you include the space immediately around you? Your fluid body. Dr. Becker, one of the great students of Dr. Sutherland, called it the biosphere, which is a great term, but it's the same thing as the fluid body. So just see if you can take in a little bit more of a sense of your wholeness, yeah? So you're not just orienting into specific places in your body, tracking through from your legs to your pelvis, to your feet, to your head, to whatever. That's important, that's useful, we can pay attention to that. But now let's see if we can, as it were, just take a bit of a wider view and see if we can take in a sense of our own wholeness. Knowing or understanding, or at least being open to the fact or the principle that we don't end at the skin. So I can take a sense of my biosphere if I include that field around me, and that whole field also has a shape and it has a movement and it has patterns. But what if I could just sit back and just settle and rest into that wholeness simply by letting go? And I'll explain that a little bit. Very naturally, we have a wider field of attention, but we usually narrow it down. We lock it down in protection, but physiologically, our natural state is actually very spacious. And so when we begin to just let things be as they are, and when we begin to let go, we can just naturally allow our attention to include a sense of the wider space around us. Just see how that works for you. So this is important. What I'm saying here, it's not about doing anything. It's primarily about letting go. What if you just let go? What if you stop trying? What if you stop managing? What if you stop controlling? How would it be? You see, and then naturally, when we do that, our attention can start to widen. We can take in more of a sense of our wholeness. Let's just rest with that for a few minutes. So please understand, essentially, I'm talking about letting go and resting. I'm not talking about doing anything or managing anything or manipulating anything. Resting and letting go and allowing that natural sense of widening or spaciousness to show itself. And then maybe as we let go even more, we can allow our attention to move even further out from the biosphere, out into the space around us, maybe out into the room that we're in. Or we can also include a sense of the environment and a sense of, wherever we are, whether it's in a city or in the country. But, we're all sitting in front of our computers, but we're also, in relation to this wider field, this wider space all around us. And again, as we rest and as we let go and we settle, you may find that your attention can naturally breathe out even more out into the wider space around you and take in a sense of the room that you're in and the qualities of the room and maybe the air currents or the noises or the scent or whatever's there in the room with you. Maybe the kind of, you could say, the energy of the room as well, or the consciousness of the room. And we're in interchange with that. Our fluid bodies are in interchange with the space around us, with the room, and also with the natural world that's outside beyond the room. So what if we just sat here, just maybe for a few minutes, just resting, and just allowing, letting go, allowing your attention to naturally widen, to naturally breathe out. And then just to allow whatever wants to happen, not controlling it, not managing it, but just synchronizing to a sense of our own individuated wholeness, and then maybe even beyond wider fields of wholeness that are around us. And what if we just sat there and allowed things to happen? How would that be for you? Just letting go. Letting whatever wants to come in. Letting whatever wants to let go. Allowing this interchange between your fluid body and the wider space around you. Let's just rest with that. Just letting what wants to happen. Just letting go, allowing, trusting. One of the phrases that Dr. Sutherland used repeatedly when he was teaching his work was trust the tide. He said you can rely on the tide, trust it. But to trust it, we've got to maybe feel safe enough and okay enough to be able to let go a bit of our grasp and our managing and our defending and our controlling, which is also very intelligent. But when we start to let go of that, maybe we can start to move into a deeper relationship with life's forces. We take maybe another 2 minutes, just resting, letting whatever wants to happen, allowing your attention just to widen and breathe out and kind of return to a natural state of spaciousness. Just allowing what wants to happen. Just notice what goes on in your body as you do that. How are the sensations in your body as you let go? Rest more into a sense of your wholeness and just allow whatever wants to happen. What's happening physiologically for you right now? And maybe take a few slow, deep breaths, and then if your eyes are closed, you can open your eyes and just slowly, slowly, slowly start to transition back. You might want to give yourself a little bit of a stretch and maybe a few breaths, maybe move your body a little bit after this sitting still for a while. Great. Great. So, how are you doing? Yeah, thank you. Good.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Oh, well, I understand that amount of Spanish, so thank you, Alessandra.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Pleased to meet you, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Oh, Gabrielle, thanks a lot for your comment. Yeah, great. Okay, well, I hope that this has given you a little taster. I mean, that's the sort of the purpose tonight. You know, one of the, I don't know how many of you are interested in training, but I want to talk a little bit about that now, just in terms of what comes next, if for those who are interested. But anyway, I hope it's given you some kind of felt sense and experience. That's great. Thank you, Flo. You feel relaxed, and I'm pleased that it's had some beneficial effect on you and could feel the ebb and flow in your field. That's beautiful. These are just some founding principles. I mean, there's a lot to biodynamic practice. It's not just one thing. But I think tonight I've touched on on a few areas that hopefully are useful for you. I'm going to just mention a few things if I come back to screen share. And I need to find this thing, and then I'm going to go to play it again. So basically, I want to just, this is no hard sell, this is just information. We have a training that we run. It's under 2 years. It includes 48 days of classroom attendance. The seminars there are 11 seminars, and each one is 4 to 5 days in length. And we've started a class, but we are accepting applications still for this class because we've got the second seminar that's taking place in just in a week's time. So it's not very long, but we still do have a couple of places available. And so if anybody is interested, they're very welcome to jump in, and I'll talk a little bit about how to do that. But there's it's an extensive training. It's a serious training, well, with a lot of humor as well, I would like to say. A lot of fun, but serious as well. Covers a broad range of skills, a lot of tutor supervision. We keep one tutor for 4 students at all times, so we do a lot of hands-on in the room. And there's a lot of sort of support that's there for the development of these kind of palpation skills and perceptual skills that we work with. There is home study and practice between the seminars. And we also have a unique teaching clinic, which is in London, where people can gain clinical experience a little bit further down the line. You're given supervised practice with clients. It's a low-cost clinic for members of the public. We're one of the first schools to form. We were started in 1989. We have a tremendous lineage. I mean, some of my teachers I haven't really got time to talk about them, but I bow down, and I've been blessed with those teachers, some great pioneers within the field, and I try to honor that within my teaching as well. Including some of the first people who brought cranial work to the UK, yeah, it's just some of the leading teachers. I started this school with a colleague of mine who's now in retirement. His name is Franklin Sills, who did a tremendous amount to develop a curriculum for biodynamic practice, and we were very much part of that development process with Franklin. We've got very experienced teachers. Well, I've got some experience. You also met Nikolai this evening very briefly at the start, but our whole team has wonderful experience. We include a lot of new stuff, a lot of cutting edge material, a lot of very creative teaching. It's not just dry lectures and get on, I mean, there's a lot of interaction, and we do movement work and meditation and all kinds of, drawings and all kinds of creative ways of interacting. There's support between the seminars. And also for those people who live long distance, there is a possibility to attend some of the early seminars online, not just in person. So we can talk about that if you do want to jump in. And that may be a possibility, at least for a couple of the seminars that are coming up. And it's a training that provides a really solid foundation for professional practice. So there we are. We're starting next week. The second seminar is June the 5th to the 8th. If any of you do want to come and join us, just let us know sooner rather than later. I know we've got a couple of people here who are already on the course, so I know that, but we'll catch you up with material from the first seminar. We'll do that we do video recordings, so you can watch the videos of the first 5 days that we did on the first seminar, and also we'll meet with you for private tutorials once you've had a chance to look at those videos, in order to catch you up on that stuff, so that you won't be kind of all out at sea exploring this work. If you do want to read up a little bit more about it, this is a book that I wrote. It's actually the first book that was ever published on biodynamic craniosacral practice. Now there's some wonderful things, great resources that are there, but it's a book that I just revised about a year ago. There's a new 3rd edition that's out. It's available on Amazon. So, if you want to just do a bit more background reading, then you can do that. So I think that's it for now. I'm pretty well done, and we're 2 minutes to completion. So I've pretty well taken up the time, but there can be a couple of minutes if there's any questions, or if any of you would like to share anything before we close the meeting. How are you doing? Good? Any questions? Anything you'd like to ask? Here's your opportunity. You can write it. Oh gosh, there's chats. I haven't been tracking it. I hope one day you'll do the hands-off training. Yeah. Okay, that's another topic. I'm not sure I'm going to go down there now. I do believe that hands-off work can be very useful and very important, but there's something about touch which grounds this work in the physiology of the body. And I feel it's an essential element. I started out, can I say my grandmother was a healer, my great-grandmother was a healer. I came from this kind of line and tradition, but so I feel like I've got some experience of distance healing, and I know it works. I know it's fantastic. I know it's beautiful, but I would prefer that people don't call it craniosacral therapy, because I think it does work and it can use craniosacral principles. But I think that for one of the unique features of craniosacral practice is the element of touch, and that we can feel these forces, not just from a distance and outside the body, but how they manifest physiologically, and that we can be in direct relationship with that. I think there's something very profound about that, and I don't really want to let go of that. So, Claire, biodynamic craniosacral therapy and craniosacral therapy one and the same? No, it's a kind of different. I mean, we both come from the same roots. Biodynamic craniosacral practice, I would say, is more the practice that orients to the deeper organizing forces, and it's a non-directive, non-manipulative approach. There are also what we call biomechanical approaches that involve the practitioner doing things to the patient and following protocols. In biodynamics, it's much more about following the inherent intelligence within our physiology and supporting that rather than applying techniques. So we learn a whole range of skills to do that. That's the shortest answer that I can give you right now about that, Claire, but I hope it's enough just to give you a sense. There are a number of different branches and schools within this tradition, and I think you can probably find some articles on our website if you wanted to look a little bit more at that. So on our website, there's a page, articles and things, and articles and videos, and there's a few articles there that might describe for you a little bit more, some of the, what biodynamics is and what the differences are. Do we have psychologists coming on the course, Wemi? Absolutely, we do. We have about 2 or 3, interestingly, on the current training. We've got about 4 medical doctors on the current training as well. It's a range of people from osteopaths, and also one of the things about the training is that we also are very open to people coming in as a change of career with no prior experience. But we talk about that at interview. The people with no prior experience maybe do a bit more work at our teaching clinic, and they also have to have some anatomy and physiology. As a psychologist, you're not allowed to touch. I don't know how you can get around that, Wemi, but I think that as long as you clearly delineate that what you are practicing is biodynamic craniosacral therapy with clients, I think that's a way that you're not going to get into any kind of difficulty. If you start perhaps mixing it with people who you're treating as a psychologist, and if part of your professional rulings is that you're not allowed to touch, then I appreciate there's a difference, but separating the practices is the way to go. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ron. You've got to go. Have I missed anything here? Susan, I'd like to share that I sustained a wrist fracture last weekend. The meditation helped my system return to more wholeness. Hallelujah, Susan. Well done. Oh, I can see your plaster now. Oh, good luck. May you keep whole, keep holding that in relationship to your wholeness, and I'm sure it's going to heal in the best possible way, and that's the way to go. So yeah, okay, thank you, and a few nice comments. So I do hope you've appreciated it, but I think we've come to the end of our time. I've enjoyed it, and thank you so much, and thank you, Alessandra, as well. Please do be in touch if you are interested in going further. As I say, I don't know when we're starting a training after this. I don't have plans for that yet. I'm not sure that it's going to be next year because I'm going to give myself a bit of a break. I'm too damn busy these days. So
thank you so much.
Oh, Wemi, you're really welcome. Yeah, I'm really pleased you can join us, and thank you for coming. Thank you to all. Okay, I just think I need to stop talking and close the meeting. So let's leave it there. Much appreciated, everybody. See you soon. Take care.